I'm Rachel Mitchell, 32, and I never thought I'd see my parents' faces twist with contempt as I walked into that courtroom. Dad's jaw tightened while Mom whispered something that made him nod. Their attorney looked smugly confident. 10 years of building my career while they systematically drained my inheritance from Grandma Eleanor money she explicitly left for my education and future. They thought I was just their doormat daughter who'd never fight back. But when Judge Harrington reviewed the documents I'd spent 3 years meticulously gathering, the look on his face told everyone in that courtroom everything was about to change. If you're watching this right now and feeling that knot in your stomach because someone you trusted betrayed, you know that you're not alone. I'm sharing my story from start to finish today, and I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that subscribe button and stay with me as I reveal how I discovered my own parents had stolen nearly everything my grandmother left for me, and how I finally got justice. My grandmother Eleanor was the backbone of our family. While my parents Linda and Thomas Mitchell built their real estate business, Grandma practically raised me. She lived just 3 blocks away in a modest brick house that smelled like cinnamon and old books. Despite her simple lifestyle, everyone knew Eleanor Mitchell had money. My grandfather had owned a successful insurance company, and after he passed when I was 7, Grandma managed those investments quietly but effectively. "Money doesn't define character, Rachel," she would tell me while helping with homework at her kitchen table. "But it can reveal it." I didn't understand what she meant until it was too late. When I was 18 and preparing for college, Grandma Eleanor had a sudden stroke. I was devastated. She'd been looking forward to seeing me graduate high school, had already bought a new dress for the ceremony. Instead, I wore black to her funeral 2 days after getting my diploma. The reading of the will happened a week later in our family attorney's office. I sat between my parents while Mr. Simmons adjusted his glasses and began reading the document. "To my son Thomas and his wife Linda, I leave my house and its contents," Mr. Simmons read. My parents nodded solemnly. "To my beloved granddaughter Rachel," he continued, "I leave my investment portfolio and accounts currently valued at approximately $750,000 to be held in trust by her parents until she reaches the age of 25, with the explicit instruction that these funds be used for her education and future establishment." I remember feeling stunned. That was a life-changing amount of money. My parents didn't react much, just exchanged quick glances. Later, Dad patted my shoulder and said, "Don't worry about any of this now. Focus on college, we'll handle everything." And I trusted them completely. The first sign something was wrong came when I applied to Northwestern, my dream school. I'd been accepted with a partial scholarship, but still needed about $30,000 per year. When I mentioned using my inheritance, Mom frowned. "There are complications with Grandma's investments," she explained. "The money is tied up right now. You'll need to take out student loans for now, and we'll reimburse you when everything's sorted out." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? These were my parents. Throughout college, whenever I asked about the inheritance, the answers grew increasingly vague. "The market's down. There are legal issues with the transfer. The investments are growing for your future." Meanwhile, I worked part-time jobs, took out more loans, and pinched pennies. I graduated with a degree in marketing and $87.00 student debt. That same month, my parents began a massive renovation of their house and bought a vacation property in Naples, Florida. "Business is booming," my dad explained, when I noticed their sudden spending. "We've been saving for years." My brother Kevin, 3 years older than me, never seemed concerned about any of this. He'd always been the favorite, the son who followed Dad into real estate while I pursued marketing. Kevin had somehow afforded a down payment on a nice house right after college while I was drowning in debt. "Mom and Dad know what they're doing," he told me when I expressed concern about my inheritance. "Stop being so greedy." But as I watched them enjoy luxuries while I struggled with mounting debt, something felt increasingly wrong. After graduation, I moved back home to save money while working an entry-level marketing job that barely covered my student loan payments. Living with my parents gave me a front-row seat to their suddenly lavish lifestyle, new furniture, exotic vacations, country club memberships, all while I couldn't afford basic health care. "When your inheritance comes through, you'll be set," Dad would say, patting my hand whenever I brought up money concerns. But as the months passed, the excuses multiplied. My 25th birthday, when I was supposed to receive full control of my inheritance according to Grandma's will, came and went without mention. When I finally gathered the courage to ask directly, Mom's expression hardened. "Rachel, there have been complications. The market crashed, investments underperformed. There were taxes and fees." She sighed dramatically. "There's some money left, but it needs to stay invested to recover." "Why are you so obsessed with this? It's just money." Dad joined in. "After everything we've done for you, this is the thanks we get. Constant questioning about money. What would your grandmother think?" Their responses left me feeling guilty and confused. Was I being greedy, ungrateful? Maybe there really had been financial complications I didn't understand. Kevin was no help. "You've always been jealous that Mom and Dad give me more attention," he said, when I tried to discuss it with him. "Now you're causing drama over money." Typical Rachel. The only person who took my concerns seriously was Marcus Washington, my boyfriend of 8 months. Marcus worked as a paralegal at a law firm downtown, and raised his eyebrows when I explained my situation. "Rachel, this doesn't sound right," he said one night as we sat in his apartment. "If your grandmother left you that money in her will with specific instructions, your parents can't just do whatever they want with it. There are laws about this." "But they're my parents," I argued. "They wouldn't steal from me." Marcus gave me a look I'll never forget, part sympathy, part disbelief. People do all kinds of things when it comes to money, even parents. I dismissed his concerns initially, but his words planted a seed. Meanwhile, my parents' manipulation intensified. Whenever I brought up the inheritance, they'd say things like, "Family doesn't keep score about money. Your grandmother would be so disappointed in your attitude. We've always taken care of you. Don't you trust us?" Their tactics worked. I began doubting myself, wondering if I was the problem. I stopped asking about the money, trying to be the good daughter they wanted. Then came the breaking point. I needed an emergency root canal that would cost $2,100. My insurance would only cover $100, and I couldn't afford the rest. In tears, I asked my parents if they could help, not even from my inheritance, just as a loan. "We're a little tight right now," Mom said, looking genuinely regretful. "Can you put it on a credit card?" 3 days later, Dad drove home in a brand new Lincoln Navigator, a $75,000 luxury SUV. That night, I heard them discussing plans for another renovation. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the lies, the manipulation, the gaslighting. If they were lying about this, what else had they lied about? That night, I made a decision. I would find out exactly what happened to my inheritance no matter what it took. I moved out of my parents' house the following weekend, finding a tiny apartment with 2 roommates to split the rent. My parents seemed surprised by my sudden departure, but didn't try to stop me. They probably thought I'd come crawling back when money got tight. Instead, I began my investigation. Every day after work, I'd head to the public library to research estate law and inheritance fraud. Marcus couldn't officially help me. His firm had actually done business with my parents, but he pointed me toward resources and explained legal terms I didn't understand. "First step is getting a copy of the actual will," he advised. "Not what your parents told you was in it, but the real document." I requested the will from county records, paying a small fee for copies. When the document arrived, I read it carefully at my kitchen table. Grandma's intentions were crystal clear: $750, 0 inches investments, and accounts for my education and future to be managed by my parents as trustees, until I turned 25, at which point full control would transfer to me. There were no conditions, no complicated clauses allowing them to use the money for themselves. They had simply been entrusted to manage it for me. The next step was tracking down my grandmother's financial advisor. I found Jeffrey Bennett still working at the same firm, though he initially refused to talk to me, citing client confidentiality. I understand privacy concerns, I told him during my third attempt, but I'm the beneficiary of the trust. Don't I have a right to know what's happened to my inheritance? He remained non-committal but suggested I might want to look into the trust account statements. If you were to request those from the institutions where accounts were held as the named beneficiary, you might find them informative. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I spent weeks visiting banks where Grandma had accounts, getting stonewalled at most of them because I wasn't an account holder. But at Milwaukee First National, I met Marge Patterson, an elderly secretary who remembered my grandmother. Eleanor Mitchell, she said, smiling at the name. Lovely woman. Very careful with her money. Wanted to make sure her granddaughter was taken care of. She studied my face. That would be you, I suppose. I nodded, explaining my situation without directly accusing my parents. Marge's expression grew concerned. I shouldn't do this, she said quietly, but come back tomorrow at 4:30. I'll see what I can find. When I returned, Marge slid a folder across her desk. I can give you 15 minutes with these. They never leave this room. Inside were transaction records for one of Grandma's investment accounts. I quickly scanned the pages, taking photos with my phone when Marge stepped away. What I found made me feel physically ill. Shortly after Grandma's death, the account worth nearly $300,000 had been transferred into a trust as directed by the will. But over the next 7 years, there had been systematic withdrawals. Large sums moved to an entity called Mitchell Family Investments LLC. I'd never heard of this company. Further research revealed it had been formed 1 month after Grandma died with my parents as the sole members. They had created a shell company to siphon my inheritance into their personal business ventures. Through persistent digging and carefully worded requests, I eventually uncovered similar patterns with other accounts. By my estimation of the original $750,000 left to me, only about $125,000 remained in a neglected investment account. My parents had stolen over $600,000 of my inheritance. With evidence mounting, I knew I needed professional help. Marcus recommended Diane Winters, an attorney specializing in estate fraud. Her consultation fee alone was $500, money I barely had, but I made the appointment. Attorney Winters reviewed my documents with a grim expression. Rachel, based on what I'm seeing, you have a strong case for breach of fiduciary duty and conversion of assets. Your parents had a legal obligation to manage this money for your benefit, not their own. Can I get it back? I asked. Potentially yes, plus interest and possibly punitive damages. But I need to be honest, this won't be quick, cheap, or emotionally easy. You're talking about suing your parents. I hesitated only briefly. I understand. My retainer is $5,000, she continued. If we go to trial, total costs could exceed $30,000. My heart sank. I had maybe $3.00 savings. I can't afford that. Some attorneys might take this on contingency given the evidence, but I don't work that way, she explained. However, I can recommend financing options, and if we win, your parents would likely have to pay your legal fees. That night I couldn't sleep. Was I really going to do this, sue my own parents, the people who raised me? But then I remembered the years of struggling with debt while they enjoyed my grandmother's money. The lies. The gaslighting. I took out a personal loan the next day and hired attorney Winters. The case preparation was exhausting. We gathered bank statements, property records, and tax filings. Each discovery revealed more betrayal. My parents had used my inheritance to purchase their vacation home in Florida, $240,000. Invest in 3 rental properties, $195,000. Renovate their primary residence, $110,000. Buy luxury vehicles, 95美元, $000. Most shocking was discovering that my brother Kevin had received $75,000 from my inheritance for his house down payment. He knew. He had always known. The smoking gun came when Attorney Winters subpoenaed my parents' emails and found exchanges discussing Eleanor's money explicitly. We should move another 50 kelvins from Eleanor's account for the beach house renovations. Don't worry about Rachel asking questions, she trusts us completely. If we keep the original account with a small balance, we can show her market losses explain the rest. Reading those words, seeing how they had plotted to deceive me broke something inside me. But it also hardened my resolve. When we filed the lawsuit, my parents' response came quickly. First, dismissive phone calls. This is all a big misunderstanding. We were just managing the money. Then, threats. You have no idea what you're doing. You'll never win this. Finally, they hired Bradford Coleman, a notoriously aggressive attorney, known for his scorched earth tactics. His first move was filing a motion to dismiss, claiming the statute of limitations had expired. The judge denied it. Next came a formal response to our complaint, painting me as a money-hungry daughter trying to extort loving parents who had only ever acted in Rachel's best interest. If you've ever had that moment where you realize someone you trusted completely had been lying to your face for years, you know the unique pain I was feeling. It's like the ground beneath you disappears. I'd love to hear in the comments if you've ever experienced something similar with family. How did you handle it? Did you confront them or walk away? While you're thinking about that, please hit that like button if you appreciate people sharing real stories about family betrayal. These conversations help us all feel less alone. Now let me tell you what happened when my entire extended family got involved. The lawsuit transformed a private betrayal into a very public family crisis. My Aunt Susan, my father's sister, called an emergency family meeting at her house. Naively, I thought perhaps some family members might support me once they knew the truth. I was wrong. Walking into Aunt Susan's living room felt like entering a tribunal. My parents sat on the couch looking appropriately wounded. Kevin stood by the fireplace, arms crossed. Aunts, uncles, and cousins filled every chair, their expressions, ranging from disappointment to outright anger, all directed at me. Rachel, Aunt Susan began, "We're here because we're concerned about you. This lawsuit against your own parents. It's not like you." Before I could respond, the floodgates opened. One by one, family members took turns expressing their concern. "Your parents have given you everything. I can't believe you drag family matters into court. Do you know how this makes all of us look?" My father played his part perfectly, the wounded patriarch. "We've tried talking to her. We've explained that there were investment losses, that we did our best to preserve what we could of Eleanor's money." Mom dabbed at non-existent tears. "We just don't know where we went wrong with her." I tried to defend myself, to explain about the shell company, the systematic withdrawals, their luxury purchases, while I struggled with student debt. But my voice was drowned out by their collective certainty that I was the villain. Kevin delivered the cruelest blow. "You were always jealous that Mom and Dad loved me more. Now you're trying to punish them for it." The words hung in the air. No one contradicted him. I looked around the room at these people who had known me my entire life, who were choosing to believe I had suddenly become a greedy monster, rather than consider my parents might have done something wrong. Only my cousin Jessica approached me as I was leaving. "For what it's worth," she whispered, "Grandma Eleanor always said you were the one who inherited her backbone. I think she'd be proud you're standing up for yourself." My Uncle Phil, who had remained silent during the meeting, caught me at my car. "I'm not taking sides," he said carefully, "but I know my brother. He's always been creative with finances. Just be prepared, he won't back down easily." Those small moments of support were vastly outweighed by what came next. My parents launched a comprehensive campaign to discredit me. Family members received lengthy emails detailing my history of emotional problems and financial irresponsibility. Friends I'd had since childhood called to ask if I was okay, clearly having been told I was experiencing some kind of breakdown. My social media became a battlefield. I was blocked by most family members, while others left passive-aggressive comments on old photos. Remember when family meant something to you and praying you find your way back to what matters. The isolation was overwhelming. I cycled through grief, rage, and doubt. Was I overreacting? Was the money worth losing my entire family? Marcus remained steadfast. "They're manipulating you again," he pointed out. "Making you question yourself so you'll drop the case and they can keep what they took." My small circle expanded. Work friends who had initially kept a cautious distance stepped up when they saw my struggle. I joined a support group for victims of family financial abuse and discovered my story, while painful, wasn't unique. "Family members steal from each other more often than people realize," said Grace, a woman whose brother had drained their father's retirement accounts. "They count on silence and shame to get away with it." Just as I was finding my footing, a certified letter arrived from Bradford Coleman's office. My parents were threatening a countersuit for defamation, claiming my false accusations were damaging their real estate business. They demanded I drop my case immediately and sign a non-disclosure agreement, or they would pursue all available legal remedies. It was pure intimidation, a tactic to make me give up. And I almost did. As court proceedings crawled forward, my parents' attorney employed every delay tactic imaginable. Motions, continuances, challenges to evidence, each requiring responses from my attorney, each adding to my mounting legal bills. "They're trying to drain your resources," Attorney Winters explained after yet another postponement. "It's a common strategy when one side has deeper pockets. They're hoping you'll run out of money or patience before we get to trial." My loan-financed retainer of $5,000 was long gone. Legal costs had climbed past $35,000, financed through credit cards, a second loan, and the painful decision to cash out my modest $401k, accepting the tax penalties out of desperation. Work suffered as I took days off for depositions, meetings with financial experts, and document reviews. My boss was understanding initially, but his patience wore thin as the case dragged into its 7th month. "I need someone who can focus on their job, Rachel," he said during my performance review. "Your numbers are down and your mind is clearly elsewhere." I nodded, unable to argue. He was right. The pressure became nearly unbearable when my parents' attorney presented a settlement offer, $50,000, to drop the case contingent on signing a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from ever discussing what they had done. "It's a fraction of what they took," Attorney Winters noted, "but it would end this now. The decision is yours." That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by legal documents, wondering if I should just take the money and try to rebuild my life. I was exhausted, nearly broke, and increasingly isolated. Seeking comfort, I opened a box of keepsakes I'd taken when I moved out of my parents' house. Inside was a bundle of letters from Grandma Eleanor that I'd saved since childhood. I began reading them, finding warmth in her familiar handwriting. One letter written when I was 16, and questioning whether to run for student council, stood out. "Remember, Rachel, that doing the right thing is rarely the easiest path. That's precisely why it requires courage. Your grandfather used to say that character is what you do when it costs you something. I've always seen that kind of strength in you." I read those words again and again, drawing resolve from them. The next morning, I called Attorney Winters and declined the settlement offer. That same week brought an unexpected breakthrough. While organizing Grandma's letters, I found a reference to a safety deposit box I hadn't known about. After some investigation, we discovered she had kept a personal diary there updated until just days before her stroke. The diary was a revelation. Grandma had meticulously documented her financial planning, including specific investments intended for my future. More importantly, she had recorded conversations with my parents about her wishes, spoke with Thomas again about Rachel's education fund. He seems to understand the importance, but Linda was oddly resistant. Must make the conditions crystal clear in the will. And later I worry about Thomas and Linda's spending habits. They've asked for loans twice this year. I've made it abundantly clear that Rachel's inheritance is not to be touched for any reason other than her education and future. I hope they honor this when I'm gone. Attorney Winters was elated. This is extremely valuable evidence of your grandmother's intent. The diary led us to Edward Pierce, a forensic accountant Grandma had consulted about setting up my trust. He had records of the original accounts and agreed to analyze the paper trail of transactions since her death. His findings were damning. Based on my analysis, his report concluded there has been a systematic and deliberate misappropriation of funds from the Eleanor Mitchell Trust for purposes entirely unrelated to the beneficiary's education or welfare. Another unexpected ally emerged when Vivian Hammond, my grandmother's best friend, contacted me after hearing about the lawsuit. Eleanor and I discussed her will extensively, Vivian told me, over coffee. She was very specific about wanting to secure your future, especially your education. She was concerned that your parents might not prioritize that the way she would. Vivian agreed to provide a sworn affidavit about these conversations. As the trial date approached, my parents made one last desperate attempt to make me drop the case. My father called directly, ignoring the advice of his attorney, that all communication should go through legal channels. Rachel, this has gone far enough, he said, his voice uncharacteristically emotional. You're destroying this family over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding of $600,000, I replied. We've always taken care of you, we're your parents, does that count for nothing? The old guilt tactics weren't working anymore. It counts for everything, I said, quietly. That's why your betrayal hurts so much. If you go through with this trial, there's no coming back, he warned. You'll no longer be welcome in this family. I took a deep breath. You made that decision years ago when you decided to steal from me. I'm just finally acknowledging it. The call ended. A week later I received notice that the court date was set. In 30 days I would face my parents before Judge Harrington. The county courthouse was an imposing stone building, with high ceilings and an atmosphere of solemn formality. I arrived early, dressed in a conservative navy suit, carrying a portfolio containing organized copies of key documents, even though Attorney Winters had the originals. Being prepared helps with the nerves, she had advised. It didn't. My hand still trembled as I checked in with the clerk. We were assigned to Courtroom 3, where Judge William Harrington presided. I'd researched him thoroughly, a reputation for fairness, but little patience for delays or theatrics. He'd been on the bench for 22 years and had extensive experience with estate cases. At 9:30 sharp, I walked into the courtroom and saw my parents for the first time in months. They sat at the defendant's table in expensive, understated clothing that screamed responsible affluence. Mom wore a modest strand of pearls, Grandma Eleanor's pearls, I realized with a jolt. Dad had his concerned businessman expression perfected from years of zoning board meetings. When they saw me, the change in their expressions was subtle but unmistakable. Dad's jaw tightened while Mom leaned over to whisper something that made him nod firmly. Their attorney, Bradford Coleman, arranged papers with an air of casual confidence. I took my seat beside Attorney Winters, focusing on my breathing to stay calm. All rise, called the bailiff, as Judge Harrington entered. He was older than his photos suggested, with sharp eyes behind reading glasses. After preliminary introductions, Attorney Winters presented our opening statement, a clear chronological account of my inheritance, my parents' legal obligations as trustees, and the evidence of their systematic misappropriation of funds. The facts in this case are not complicated, Your Honor, she concluded. The defendants had a fiduciary duty to manage the plaintiff's inheritance for her benefit. Instead, they treated it as their personal funds, spending over $600,000 on luxury items, real estate, and gifts. While the plaintiff struggled with student loans for an education her grandmother had specifically intended to fund. Bradford Coleman's opening took a different approach, focusing on family dynamics rather than financial evidence. Your Honor, this case represents a regrettable family disagreement that should never have reached your courtroom, he began smoothly. The defendants, as loving parents and prudent financial managers, made investment decisions during challenging market conditions that the plaintiff has misinterpreted as malfeasance. Family financial arrangements are inherently private and complex. The plaintiff's accusations reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of both estate management and parental sacrifice. Judge Harrington listened impassively, occasionally making notes. When Coleman finished, he looked up with an expression I couldn't read. Miss Winters, call your first witness. I was first to testify. Attorney Winters gently led me through my relationship with Grandma Eleanor, the will, reading my struggles with student debt, and the gradual discovery of what had happened to my inheritance. I presented my evidence clearly, fighting to keep emotion from overwhelming my voice. When I described finding the emails where my parents discussed using Eleanor's money for their beach house renovations, I noticed Judge Harrington lean forward slightly, his expression darkening. Bradford Coleman's cross-examination was predictably aggressive. Miss Mitchell, isn't it true that your parents provided for you throughout your life? Yes. They fed you, clothed you, housed you, even after you were an adult. Yes. And yet you've brought this lawsuit against them, causing tremendous pain and public embarrassment. Would you say you're a grateful daughter? Attorney Winters objected, argumentative, Your Honor. Sustained Judge Harrington said sharply, counsel, stick to relevant questions. Coleman shifted tactics. Miss Mitchell, do you have any expertise in investment management or estate law? No? So you're not qualified to evaluate whether your parents' management of these accounts was appropriate or not. I don't need expertise to understand that buying themselves a beach house with my inheritance was wrong, I replied steadily. Coleman's questions continued, attempting to portray me as financially irresponsible, emotionally unstable, and vindictive. I remained composed, answering truthfully without taking his bait. Edward Pierce, the forensic accountant, testified next, presenting meticulous analysis of the money trail. Judge Harrington asked several detailed questions showing particular interest in the formation of Mitchell Family Investments LLC and its timing relative to my grandmother's death. When my father took the stand, his testimony was a masterclass in evasion. He spoke about complex financial strategies, market volatility, and prudent reallocation of assets, never directly addressing the specific withdrawals from my trust. Attorney Winters caught him in several contradictions during cross-examination. Mr. Mitchell, you testified that poor investment performance was responsible for the reduction in your daughter's inheritance, correct? The market was challenging during those years, yes. Then please explain this email from 2017 where you wrote to your wife. The Eleanor account investments are up 14% this year. We should move another 50 kelvins before Rachel starts asking questions. My father's face reddened. That was taken out of context. What possible context would justify that statement, Mr. Mitchell? He had no answer. My mother's testimony relied heavily on emotion. She cried while describing how hurt they were by my baseless accusations and insisted everything they did was for the family. We may have made some accounting errors, she admitted tearfully, but we never intended to deprive Rachel of anything. We love our daughter. The surprise witness was my brother Kevin, called by my parents' attorney. He testified about our difficult relationship and my jealousy issues, claiming I had always resented our parents' success. But during cross-examination, Attorney Winters asked a simple question: "Mr. Mitchell, did you receive $75,000 from your parents in 2016 for a down payment on your house?" "Yes," Kevin answered cautiously. "And were you aware of where that money came from?" He hesitated. "They said it was from Mom's inheritance, from Grandma. But your grandmother's will left her investments specifically to your sister, correct?" "I guess so." "So you knowingly accepted money that legally belonged to your sister?" Kevin's face flushed. "They said it was complicated. That Rachel would get her share eventually." Judge Harrington watched this exchange with particular interest, making extensive notes. As the testimony concluded, Judge Harrington asked both attorneys several pointed questions about the timeline of transactions and the specific language in the will. His focus on these details suggested he was seeing through my parents' obfuscation. "I'll take this under advisement and issue my ruling tomorrow morning," he announced. Court is adjourned. As we gathered our papers, I caught my parents exchanging worried glances. For the first time, they looked uncertain. The following morning, tension filled courtroom 3 as we awaited Judge Harrington's decision. My parents sat stiffly at their table, Mom obsessively straightening her already perfect blouse. Dad whispered intently with Bradford Coleman, who kept shaking his head slightly. I focused on breathing, trying to prepare myself for either outcome. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Judge Harrington entered and took his seat. He spent no time on preliminaries. "After careful consideration of the evidence and testimony presented, I've reached my decision in the case of Mitchell versus Mitchell." He looked directly at my parents. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff." A small gasp escaped my mother. My father's face hardened to stone. Judge Harrington continued, his voice measured but stern. "The evidence clearly establishes that the defendants violated their fiduciary duties as trustees of Eleanor Mitchell's estate. Their actions constitute a deliberate and systematic misappropriation of funds that were explicitly designated for their daughter's education and future." He outlined his ruling in methodical detail. "The defendants are hereby ordered to repay the plaintiff the sum of $680,000, representing the misappropriated principal amount of $600,000 plus $80,000 interest. Additionally, the defendants shall pay the plaintiff's legal fees and court costs, currently totaling $42,375. Judge Harrington looked at my parents over his reading glasses. "I find the defendants' conduct particularly troubling, given their position of trust. This was not a misunderstanding or a series of poor investment choices. The evidence shows a calculated effort to divert funds for personal use while actively misleading the intended beneficiary." He continued, "The court will place liens on the defendants' properties, including their primary residence, vacation home, and rental properties, to secure payment of this judgment. The defendants have 30 days to present a payment plan, or the court will order the sale of assets to satisfy the judgment." With a final tap of his gavel, it was over. I had won. The victory felt hollow in that moment. I'd proven my case, but at what cost? My parents wouldn't even look at me as they huddled with their attorney. The family I once knew was irrevocably shattered. Outside the courtroom, Bradford Coleman immediately began discussing appeal options with my parents. "This isn't over," he assured them loudly enough for me to hear. The judge clearly misinterpreted key evidence. "We have strong grounds for appeal." I felt a surge of panic. Would this never end? "Don't worry," Attorney Winters murmured, noticing my expression. "Appeals are expensive and have a low success rate in cases like this. They're just posturing." As we gathered our things to leave, I made the mistake of glancing at my parents. They finally looked at me with such pure hatred that I physically recoiled. It was as if I were looking at strangers wearing my parents' faces. In the courthouse hallway, Kevin intercepted me. His face was flushed with anger. "Are you happy now?" he demanded. "You've destroyed our family over money." "I didn't destroy anything, Kevin," I replied quietly. "They took what wasn't theirs. All I did was prove it." "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Don't ever expect to be welcome in our home again. As far as we're concerned, you're not family anymore." I watched him storm off to join our parents, feeling strangely calm. They had already discarded me years ago when they decided to steal my inheritance. Today had just made it official. Outside the courthouse, local reporters waited. My parents had some prominence in the community through their real estate business, and word of the lawsuit had spread. Cameras turned our way as we exited. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, do you plan to appeal the verdict?" "Rachel, how does it feel to win against your own parents? Will Mitchell family real estate survive this scandal?" Attorney Winters deftly guided me past the media scrum to her car. "Don't respond to any of this," she advised. "Your parents will likely try to control the narrative publicly. Let them. The court record speaks for itself." Over the following days, I learned she was right. My parents gave a tearful interview to the local newspaper, portraying themselves as victims of an ungrateful daughter who had misunderstood their financial management. They announced plans to appeal, claiming the judge had been biased. Meanwhile, I received a formal notice that my parents did not intend to comply voluntarily with the judgment, necessitating further legal action. Attorney Winters filed motions to enforce the judgment and freeze their assets. 2 weeks after the verdict, Judge Harrington granted our motion freezing my parents' business and personal accounts until they satisfied the judgment. The property liens meant they couldn't sell or refinance their homes without paying me first. The legal vice tightened and reality set in. Their appeal options dwindled as attorneys quoted prohibitive retainer fees. The freeze on their accounts disrupted their real estate business operations. Finally, 6 weeks after the verdict, their new attorney contacted Attorney Winters to discuss payment arrangements. The fight was over. As I walked to my car after that final meeting, a strange mixture of vindication and emptiness washed over me. I had won back what was rightfully mine, but the cost had been my entire family. No amount of money could fill that void. The morning sunlight streams through the windows of my new apartment as I sip coffee, watching the city wake up 16 floors below. It's been exactly 1 year since the court ruling, and though the legal battle is behind me, its echoes remain in unexpected ways. The financial aftermath resolved more quickly than expected. Faced with frozen accounts and property liens, my parents ultimately sold their vacation home and 2 rental properties to satisfy the judgment. They avoided bankruptcy, but their business suffered substantial damage from the negative publicity. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they downsized to a smaller house in a less prestigious neighborhood. The money arrived in installments over 6 months. After paying off my student loans and legal fees, I had enough to finish my MBA, make a down payment on this apartment, and establish a solid investment portfolio. For the first time in my adult life, I'm financially secure. But some costs can't be calculated in dollars. My relationship with my immediate family is non-existent. My parents haven't attempted any contact since the final settlement. Kevin sent a single text message last Christmas. "Hope you're enjoying spending the family's money," which I left unanswered. The extended family largely maintains their distance. Aunt Susan invited me to Easter dinner in a stiff formal email, but the subtext was clear: come ready to apologize and make amends. I politely declined. Uncle Phil occasionally checks in, maintaining his careful neutrality. "Your father's pride is wounded," he told me recently. He built his identity around being the family provider, the successful businessman. Having his deception exposed publicly was a blow he may never recover from. I understand this intellectually, but emotionally, the betrayal still cuts deep. Cousin Jessica has become a surprising ally, meeting me for coffee monthly. "The family narrative is slowly shifting," she reported last week. Now that people have had time to think about it, more of them are questioning what Uncle Thomas and Aunt Linda did. No one says it openly, but the doubts are there. I'm establishing new boundaries with everyone connected to that part of my life. I no longer jump when the phone rings, wondering if it's another relative calling to berate me. I don't scan social media for family updates or agonize over holiday gatherings I'm not invited to attend. My focus has shifted to building my own life. The MBA I completed with my recovered inheritance helped me land a marketing director position at a growing tech firm. The work is challenging and fulfilling in ways my previous jobs never were. Marcus has been my constant through all of this. Our relationship deepened during the ordeal, and last month he proposed during a weekend trip to Lake Michigan. The vintage emerald ring that once belonged to his grandmother now sits on my finger, a family heirloom passed with love, not deception. Perhaps the most meaningful use of my inheritance has been establishing the Eleanor Mitchell Educational Foundation, a small scholarship fund for marketing students who demonstrate integrity and determination values. My grandmother, cherished. The first recipient starts college this fall. Last week I visited Grandma Eleanor's grave for the first time since winning the lawsuit. I brought yellow roses, her favorite, and spent an hour sitting beside her headstone telling her everything that had happened. I think you suspected they might try something like this, I said to the quiet cemetery air. That's why you were so specific in your will. I like to think she would have approved of how I fought for what was rightfully mine. That evening, I found an unexpected letter in my mailbox from my mother. For several days, I left it unopened on my kitchen counter, uncertain whether to read it or return it unread. Finally, curiosity won. The letter was brief, less than a page. No explicit apology, but between the carefully chosen words, I sensed something like regret. I find myself thinking about your grandmother lately. She was always direct about her disapproval when she thought someone was making a mistake. In that way, you are very much like her. Mom mentioned she was seeing a therapist, that Dad still refused to discuss what had happened. She closed with, I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that not a day passes when I don't think about the choices we made and where they led us. I haven't responded. Perhaps someday I will, but I'm not ready yet. The door isn't permanently closed, but neither is it standing open. What I've learned through all of this is that standing up for yourself, even against family, isn't selfish. It's necessary. My grandmother knew this. She left me more than money. She left me the example of her strength. The inheritance I truly value isn't measured in dollars, but in the self-respect I reclaimed by refusing to be a victim. It's in the clarity that comes from finally seeing the truth about my family, painful though it was. It's in the knowledge that I can trust myself to fight for what's right, even when it feels impossible. I still have moments of sadness about what I've lost. But more often I feel gratitude for what I've gained: authentic relationships, financial security, and the quiet confidence that comes from facing your worst fear and surviving it. Have you ever had to stand up to family for what was right? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. The journey of healing from family betrayal isn't easy, but knowing we're not alone makes it more bearable. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences. Share this with someone who might need to hear that standing up for themselves is worth it even when it's hard. Thank you for being part of my journey, and remember, family should be about love, not exploitation. Until next time, take care of yourselves and your inheritance.